Hello. So, I've been thinking a bit about things. Because interesting fact is, well, as you probably are aware, I'm British. And another interesting fact about my YouTube channel, much of my audience are American. And that means that well, I don't know exactly the proportions of people who will or won't be celebrating, but, well, the United States of America is planning its 250th birthday, and it's kind of going through some of its celebrations for its founding history. And you know, I'm hardly someone to say you can't celebrate who you are, and why not? Why not enjoy it? I mean, part of the reason I emanate a lot of Britishness is that my American audience quite like it. But I was thinking, what can I do? You know, to have everyone have a bit of a jolly good time. I realised something. Despite the fact that the YouTuber Matt Mitrovich, as he introduced himself, Matt Mitrovich, the alternate historian, was one of the inspirations for my channel, I haven't really done that much alternate history on the channel. And, you know, so as a sort of thing, we're thinking alternate history and American Revolutionary period. Now, yeah, you could probably see what's coming, but don't worry, it's going to be slightly different with this series. Because, you know, I know it's probably a bit much thinking, oh no, not another one of those alternate histories where you like mess around with the geopolitics or military tactics so that George Washington gets fisted on the battlefield, the founding fathers all end up well hung, and everyone kisses George III's ring. Because let's face it, even my use of innuendos can't liven up that old chestnut. But no. For this alternate history series, we're not going to have the Americans lose the revolution, or win the revolution, or it to end in a draw, which, if I remember rightly from the first Europa Universalis game, the War of Independence scenario technically ends in a draw if the colonists don't take Canada and Britain doesn't take them over. I never called England in the game for some reason. Anyway, more importantly, there's not going to be an American Revolution. America will be free, by which I mean able to amend its constitutional law without Britain's say-so, a power granted to Canada in 1982 from the Canada Act. But that's part of my thinking. What if America left peacefully? No shots fired against the Crown or Britannia's forces in general. The British Empire and America, you know, basically, what if America got its independence in a similar way to Canada or Australia or New Zealand? You know, how might America be different? Now, there is a point here. A point of reference. Because, well, it turns out that the American Revolution is in some ways quite significant. And you might think, well, yeah, it's the founding part, it's like part of the founding of the United States. It's at least in some historiographies. Surely you'd say that's significant. I mean, yes it is, but there's another significance that I'm going to, take you over to now in a PowerPoint form. Because you see, there is in fact a question of history that this topic touches on. That question being, how did we get from a
medieval society to a modern society. There are two angles to this, one being economics, where the medieval society's economics are defined by a sort of localized trade controlled and regulated. A modern economy is one defined whereby everyone's more interconnected, with what's available in the economy being mustered by private capital, by the availability of private capital, the preference of consumer choices, or as they sometimes call it, market demand, and government intervention, be that legal, fiscal, or monetary or supply side. Then, of course, there's the politics of it. So, this being the medieval society, whereby society was governed separately depending on who you were, with sort of a fealty to the local king, but with different rules and governances depending on your local area. You could pull out of it if you like. If you didn't like the town's laws, you could just move outside of it, lose its protections, and just set up in the woods yourself. But point being, there were 3 different classes governed by 3 different laws. The peasants, or as they call them, those who worked. The knights, I say this is for European context still, but those are aka those who, the knights being sort of like those who fought, and those who prayed, the clergy, all of which being governed by their own separate laws and separate authorities who each negotiated power between them. Whereas the politics of a modern society is one where everyone is a part of a particular nation state, whether by birth, by parentage, and also or by emigration or migration, and where all individuals are, well, individuals. Everybody is essentially, the only relationship sort of recognised is between the individual and the state. There isn't a legal separation of classes in the same way that there would be in a medieval society. I know I'm simplifying a lot of these, but we'll get back to it later. And of course, a single legal framework governing all citizens of a particular polity. Polities being nation states.
Well, welcome back from the PowerPoint form. And yeah, I know, this costume's a bit fabby, but you might be thinking, so this whole transition from a medieval society to a modern society, what's that got to do with America? Well, there we come up against what we call the Atlantic Revolution. A thesis of history that set out the idea that in order to create the modern society, there needed to be a violent overthrow of the aristocratic order and its replacement by the middling sort. And that this happened in 3 places in time. First, is traditionally known as the English Revolution. I don't know why, because it started in Scotland in 1638, ended in Ireland in 1689, but I guess because the English Civil War was a big part of it, it traditionally got that name. Next, the American Revolution. We know a lot about that already. You know, Boston Tea Party. Yeah, we got that. That story is probably something that there are a lot more skillful historians can tell you about than me. And then the French Revolution. You know, the one with the guillotines and all that. And then Napoleon, who, through the Napoleonic Wars, spreads modern society throughout Europe. And then throughout the Victorian age, which is more my area, this modernity was spread from Europe and North America through the superior power of industry. Able to output more goods than the domestic markets of the global south, and through military conquest and colonization. Or, in a phrase that I'm sure I saw somewhere but I can't remember where, gunboats and petticoats. To create a thoroughly modern world by about 1900. Setting up the social, political and economic institutions of the modern world by the dawn of the 20th century. But that raises an interesting question for us. Suppose America never had a violent overthrow, which, leaving the British Empire peacefully, would probably bring about. So we have that question. Does the rise of the middling sort necessitate by revolution? We can keep a lookout for those institutions we brought up in the PowerPoint as we go forward. But as this is a sort of session 0, let's start with some ground rules. First off, I can't change anything before October the 8th, 1763. That date's important, because that date is the day after the 7 Years' War ends, also known as the French-Indian War. Especially in North America, and actually I don't know which you're meant to call it. It doesn't matter. But anyway, and we'll probably won't even discuss it after this section anyway. Point being, I can't change anything from that point, because that gives us the setup for, well, the colonies, and where they were as the momentum for independence and Americanness was building, at least in the Atlantic Revolution thesis. Then, however, things that happen afterwards can be changed. But we need to sort out some problem. We need to sort out some points. First, a change has to be, well, logical really. It has to make sense, in a sense. You know, if I do something I think I should define logical really. So it has to be consistent. So for example, if I say changed, George III getting Porphyria earlier on so that he can't block the planned compromise whereby the colonies would be represented in the Continental Congress, who would then negotiate a dividend with Westminster, similar to how the East India Company was organising its lands in India at the time. I must also mean that, for example, he can't stop Catholic emancipation in 1801, because part of the reason that compromise fell down was that he basically leveraged the laws to block that part. So it would logically mean that if he's rendered incapable for the American colonies earlier on, he would probably have to do the same for Catholic emancipation later on. I mean, I'll focus most of this is going to be on North America, but that's just a little aside. Basically, changes have to make sense and be followed through. They can't just, like, disappear into the background when they're no longer needed. That said, we also can't butterfly this. Everything has to make sense from what's going on, and also, no hindsight. No time travel. People have to be able to make decisions based on what was available at the time. So, I can't just have a load of AKs arrive from the future or something. That's fun for some works of fiction, but for this purpose I'm going to try and keep it a bit grounded. But then, there is that final rule. Have fun. When I say have fun, I mean that this is not going to be the most detailed or historical kind of thing, because this is not history. It is amusement. Speculation on things that did not happen. There won't be sources for this because the history did not take place. I cannot provide material evidence for something that didn't happen. That's kind of what they mean by you can't prove a negative. Well, actually, no, that's not what it means. But point is, but in this context, it kind of means I can't say, I can't provide you sources, so I can't be ultra serious with this because it never happened. It never took place. So I'm just going to be like, if this happened, that. But of course we know it didn't happen, so anyway, that's the point. All a bit of fun. Try to have fun with it. And I hope to see you in the first session soon. Soon of what I'm going to call Born in the Warming Pan. Yeah, it's a pun on the idea of born in the fire, referring to the American Revolution, so as this is more of a gentle simmer, it kind of works better that way. And so I'm just going to bid you all farewell. Hope you enjoy the show. Hopefully I'll get some better garb for later on in the programme, and it was lovely having you here.